5 Have a Wonderful Time by Enid Blyton. Part 1. "I do think it's mean," said George fiercely. "Why can't I go when the others do? I've had 2 weeks at home and I haven't seen the others since school broke up, and now they're off for a wonderful fortnight and I'm not with them." "You can go as soon as that cold of yours is better," said her mother. "It was your own fault. You would go and bathe and stay in far too long, and it's only the 3rd week in April. Now, be patient, dear. I'll let you go off to your cousins as soon as ever I can. Tomorrow, if you're good, and don't cough much today." "Oh, Mother, why didn't you say so before?" said George. "I'm perfectly all right. If I can go off tomorrow, I promise I won't cough once today." "Well, we'll see," said Mother. "Anyway, you can get your things ready and I'll pack them this afternoon." "Thank you, Mother," said George, giving her a sudden hug. "How do I get to Fay Knight's castle? By train?" "Yes, I'll take you to Kirin Station and you can catch the 10:40, said her mother. "If you send a card to Julian, he'll get it tomorrow morning and will meet you." "I'll write it now," said George happily. "Come on, Timmy." The two of them went out of the door like a whirlwind. When she got to her room, George scribbled the postcard. It was short and to the point. "Cold gone, coming tomorrow, arriving 12:05, so make sure you all meet me, and Timmy. George." After she had posted the card, she returned home and began to pick out the things she wanted to take with her. Her mother came to help. "Now you must pack those warm vests," she said, "and you must take a rug. The caravans are not very warm this weather." "I wonder what they're like," said George, stuffing the vests in. "They're funny old-fashioned ones, Julian said in his letter. Perhaps they're like the ones gypsies have." "You'll see tomorrow," said her mother. Suddenly the telephone shrilled out. George's mother went to answer it. "Hello?" she said. "Oh, it's you, Julian. Is everything all right?" George sped out into the hall at once. Surely Julian wasn't ringing to tell her not to come. She listened breathlessly. "Yes, of course your uncle is all right," said her mother. "Why shouldn't he be?" "No, he hasn't disappeared. Julian, what are you talking about?" When at last her mother put down the receiver, she said, "Julian was only ringing up to make sure that your father wasn't one of the scientists who have suddenly disappeared. Apparently in today's paper there's a report about 2 that have completely vanished, and dear old Julian wanted to make sure your father was still here." Next morning, on a dewy hillside a good distance from Kirin, where George lived, 2 boys leapt down the steps of a caravan and went to one nearby. They rapped on the door. "Anne, are you awake? It's a heavenly day." "Course I'm awake," cried a voice. "The door's unlocked. Come in. I'm getting breakfast." Julian and Dick pushed open the blue-painted door. "The postman has just brought a card from George," said Julian. "I'm glad she's coming at last, and old Timmy too." "We only came here ourselves 3 days ago," said Dick, "so she hasn't really missed much." "We'll eat our breakfast sitting on the steps of your caravan, Anne," said Julian. So they all sat there eating hard-boiled eggs, well-buttered bread, and chunky homemade marmalade. Their 2 caravans were set on a sloping grassy hillside. A tall hedge grew behind and kept off the wind. On the opposite side rose Fay Knight's, an old ruined castle, whose great walls still defied the gales that sometimes blew over the hills. It had 4 towers. 3 were very much broken, but the 4th looked almost complete. The windows were slit-holes, made centuries back when archers shot their arrows from them. A very steep pathway led up to the castle. At the top of it was a gateway, enormously strong, built of big white blocks of stone. The gateway was now filled by a great screen of wrought iron to prevent anyone entering, and the only entrance was by a small tower in which was a narrow door. Here there was a turnstile through which visitors might go to see the old castle. A high, strong wall ran all round the castle, still standing after so many years. Bits of the top of it had fallen down the hill and lay half buried in grass and weeds. When they had finished their breakfast, the 3 children sat on the steps, lazing in the sun. They looked at the old ruined castle and watched the jackdaws circling round the 4 towers. "There must be about 1,000 jackdaws there," said Dick. "I wish we had field glasses so that we could watch them." "Let's hope George brings the field glasses she had for her birthday," said Julian. "We could take them up into the castle with us and see all round the countryside for miles and miles." At 11:30 it was time for them to go and meet George off the train. They set off down the grassy hillside to the stile that led into the lane below. "It'll be lovely to see Timmy again," said Anne, "and I'll be jolly glad to have George in my caravan. I didn't really mind being alone at night, but it's always nice to have George near me, and Timmy grunting in his sleep." "Look, isn't that the train coming in?" said Dick. "It must be. There's only one train in the morning here. We'd better run." They ran at top speed. The train drew in at the station just as they raced onto the platform. A head of short curly hair looked out from a window, and then another dark brown head just below it. "Hello!" shouted George, almost falling out of the door. "Oof!" barked Timmy, and leapt down to the platform almost on top of Dick. Down jumped George, her eyes shining. "Let me take that suitcase," said Julian. "We'll just slip into the village first and have a few ice creams to celebrate. There's a shop here that has some jolly decent ones." "I say, look, George has brought her field glasses with her," said Dick, suddenly noticing the brown strap over George's shoulder. "Well, I thought I must bring them," said George. "It's the first holes I've had a chance to use them. I say, how much farther is this ice cream shop?" "In the dairy here," said Julian, marching her in. "And I advise you to start off with vanilla, go on to strawberry, and finish up with chocolate." They sat down and ordered ice creams. The plump little shopwoman smiled at them. She knew them by now. "This is very good weather for you," she said. "You're going to have some neighbours soon. I hear there's some fair folk coming. They usually camp up in your field." "Is there going to be a fair near here, then?" asked George. "Yes," said the shopwoman. "There's to be a fire-eater, and a man who can get himself free in under 2 minutes, no matter how tightly he's tied up with rope. And there's a man called Mr. India Rubber. He can bend himself anywhere, and wriggle through drain pipes, and get in at a window if it's left open just a crack." "What else?" said Anne. "This sounds very exciting." "There's a man with snakes," said the plump little lady with a shudder. "Ugh, snakes, just fancy. I'd be afraid they would bite me." The four felt rather thrilled. What a bit of luck to have such exciting people in the same field as they were. "Is everyone finished?" asked Julian, getting some money out of his pocket. "If so, we'll take George up to the field and show her our caravans." "Who lent you them?" asked George, as they left the shop. "Some school friend, wasn't it?" "Yes, he and his family always go and camp in the Easter and summer holes," said Julian. "But this Easter they're going to France, and rather than leave their caravans empty, they thought they'd lend them out, and we're the lucky ones." They walked up the lane and came to the stile. They went up the grassy hillside to the field where their caravans were, and George exclaimed in delight, "Oh, are those our caravans? They're just like the ones the gypsies use." "The red caravan, picked out with black and yellow, is ours," said Dick. "The blue one, picked out in black and yellow, is yours and Anne's." The caravan stood on high wheels. There was a window each side. The door was at the front, and so were the steps. Colourful curtains hung at the windows, and a line of bold carving ran round the edges of the roof. "They're old gypsy caravans, painted and made really up-to-date," said Julian. "They're jolly comfortable inside, too. Bunks that fold down against the walls in the daytime, a little sink for washing up, a small larder, cupboards, shelves, everything." George was really delighted. She went into the caravan she was to share with Anne. She pulled her bunk up and down to see how it worked, and she opened the larder and cupboard doors. When they went outside again, Dick said, "Did anyone get a paper in the village?" "Yes, I did," said Julian. "Let's have a look at the weather forecast," said Dick. "If it's good, we might go for a long walk this afternoon." Julian took the folded paper from his pocket and threw it over to Dick, who sat down on the steps of his caravan and opened it. He was looking for the paragraph giving the weather forecast when headlines caught his eye. He gave an exclamation. "Hello! Here's a bit more about those 2 vanished scientists." "Julian," said George, remembering his telephone call of the night before, "whatever in the world made you think my father could be one of the vanished scientists? As if he would ever be disloyal to his country and take his secrets anywhere else." "Oh, I didn't think that," said Julian. "No, in yesterday's paper it just said that 2 of our most famous scientists had disappeared, and I thought perhaps they had been kidnapped. And as Uncle Quentin is really very famous, I just thought I'd ring up to make sure." "Well," said George, "as Mother hadn't heard a thing about them, she was awfully astonished when you asked her if Father had disappeared." "Listen to this," said Dick. "It doesn't look as if the 2 men have been kidnapped. It looks as if they just walked out and took important papers with them. Derek Terry Kane and Geoffrey Pottersham have been missing for 2 days. They met at a friend's house and then left together to walk to the underground. Since then they have not been seen. It has, however, been established that Terry Kane had brought his passport up to date and had purchased air tickets for Paris. No news of his arrival there has been reported. There! Just what I said to Mother, exclaimed George. They've gone off to sell their secrets to another country. Uncle Quentin won't be pleased about that, said Julian. Didn't he work with Terry Kane at one time? Yes, I believe he did, said George. I'm jolly glad I'm not at home today. Father will be rampaging round like anything, telling Mother hundreds of times what he thinks about scientists who are traitors. That first day they were all together was a lovely one. They went for a walk in the afternoon, and had tea at a farmhouse watched by a couple of big-eyed farm children. When they returned home and climbed over the stile at the bottom of their field, the sun was going down. The evening star had appeared in the sky and twinkled brightly. As they trudged up to their caravans, Julian stopped and pointed. Hello, look! There are 2 more caravans here, rather like ours. I wonder if it's the fair folk arriving. They went up to their own caravans and looked curiously at the one that stood nearest to theirs. It was yellow, picked out with blue and black, and could have done with a new coat of paint. It was very like their own caravans, but looked much older. There didn't seem to be anyone about the newly arrived caravans. The doors and windows were shut. There's a big box under that nearest caravan, said Julian. I wonder what's in it. The box was long, shallow and wide. On the sides were round holes punched into it at intervals. George went to the caravan and bent down to look at the box, wondering if there was anything alive in it. Timmy went with her, sniffing at the holes in curiosity. He suddenly backed away and barked loudly. A noise came from inside the box, a rustling, dry, sliding sort of noise that made Timmy bark even more frantically. "Julian," said George, "there's something in that box that Timmy has never met before, and he's half puzzled and half scared. He's barking defiance, and he'll never stop unless we drag him away." An angry voice came from the bottom of the field by the stile. "Hey, you! Take that dog away! What do you mean by upsetting my snakes?" Julian and George managed to drag Timmy away. The angry voice was now just behind them. George turned and saw a little dark man with gleaming black eyes. He was shaking his fist at them. "Sorry," said George, pulling Timmy harder. "Please stop shouting or my dog will go for you." "Go for me?" yelled the angry little man. "You keep a dangerous dog like that which smells out my snakes and will go for me? Wait till I let my snakes out. Your dog will run and will never be seen again." This was a most alarming threat. With an enormous heave, Julian, Dick and George at last got Timmy under control, dragged him up the steps of Anne's caravan and shut the door on him. Anne tried to quieten him while the other 3 went out to the angry little man again. He had dragged out the big, shallow box and had opened the lid. The 3 watched fascinated. A great head reared itself out of the box and swung itself from side to side. 2 unblinking eyes gleamed at them, and then a long, long body writhed out and glided up the man's legs, round his waist and round his neck. He fondled it, talking in a low, caressing voice. "It's a python," said Julian. "What a monster!" A second python slid out of the box, coil upon gleaming coil. It, too, wreathed itself round its owner, making a loud hissing noise as it did so. Its body was thicker than Julian's calf. Anne watched out of the caravan window, hardly able to believe her eyes. The little man quieted his snakes at last. Then, still speaking to them lovingly, he got them back into their box. He shut down the lid and locked it. Then he turned to the 3 watching children. "You see how upset you make my snakes," he said. "Now, you keep away, you hear? And keep your dog away, too. I do not like children, and nor do my snakes. You keep away, see?" He shouted the last words so angrily that the 3 jumped. "Look here," said Julian. "We only came to say we were sorry our dog barked like that. Dogs always bark at strange things they don't understand. It's only natural." "Dogs too I hate," said the little man, going into his caravan. "You will keep him away from here, especially when I have my snakes out, or one might give him too loving a squeeze." He disappeared into his caravan, and the door shut firmly. "We seem to have made a bad start with the fair folk," said Julian. "I don't like the last thing he said," George said in a low voice. "I shall certainly keep Timmy away when I see that funny little man taking out his snakes. Hullo, here comes another caravan." The new caravan came slowly up the grassy hillside, bumping as it went. On the side was painted a name in large scarlet letters, Mr. India Rubber. They all stared at the driver. He was long and thin and droopy, and he looked as if he might burst into tears at any moment. He got down, took the horse out of the shafts, and set it loose in the field. Suddenly he shouted, "Buffalo, you in?" The door of the second caravan opened, and a young man looked out, a huge young man with a mop of yellow hair, a bright red shirt, and a broad smile. "Hiya, Rubber," he called. "We got here first. Come along in. Skipper's got some food ready." Mr. India Rubber walked up the steps of Buffalo's caravan. Anne put together a light supper, and after they had finished eating she said, "Well, I don't know about you, but I feel very sleepy. Let's clear up, George, and snuggle into our bunks." The boys said good night and went off to their own caravan. The girls saw a light suddenly shining out there, and shadows moved across the curtains drawn over the windows. "Dick's lighted their lamp," said Anne. Theirs was already lighted, and the caravan looked quite cosy. The girls made their beds and put in sheets and blankets. They undressed, washed in stream water in the little sink, cleaned their teeth and brushed their hair. It took Timmy a few minutes to realise that George was going to sleep for the night in the bunk she had put up against the wall. Then, with one bound, he was on top of her and settled down on her legs. She gave a groan. "Timmy, get off my legs! Go further down." Timmy managed to curl himself up in as small a space as possible, put his head down on one of George's knees, gave one of his heavy sighs, and fell asleep. It was a blackbird in a nearby hawthorn tree that woke Timmy up the next morning. He sat up and stretched. George woke up at once because Timmy trod heavily on her middle. She couldn't think where she was at first. Then she remembered and smiled. Of course, in a caravan with Anne. Cows mooed in the distance, and the early morning sun slid in through the window and picked out the clock and the bowl of primroses. Outside, the camp began to wake up. Caravan doors opened, fires were lighted, somebody went down to the stream to get water. The boys came banging at the door of the girls' caravan. "Come on, sleepy heads, it's 7:30 and we're hungry." It wasn't long before they were all sitting round a little fire, from which came a very nice smell. Dick was frying bacon and eggs. Anne had boiled a kettle on her little stove and made some tea. "I say, aren't there a lot of caravans here now?" said George. "They must have come during the night." They stared round the field. Beside the Snake Man's caravan, and Buffalo's, and Mr. India Rubber's, there were 4 or 5 more. One interested the children very much. It was a brilliant yellow with red flames painted on the side. The name on it was Alfredo, Fire Eater. "I imagine him to be a great big fierce chap," said Dick, "a regular fire-eater with a terribly ferocious temper and an enormous voice." "There's someone coming out of his caravan now," said George. "Look." "It's a woman," said Anne. "His wife, I expect. How tiny she is. She looks Spanish, she's so dark." "This must be the fire-eater coming behind her," said George. A great big fellow came down the steps behind his tiny wife. He certainly looked very fierce, for he had a lion-like mane of tawny hair and a big red face with large gleaming eyes. He took enormous strides as he went, and his little wife had to run to keep up with him. "I think we'll keep out of his way until we know if he dislikes children too, like the Snake Man," said Dick. "I bet he makes his wife run around him and wait on him hand and foot." "Well, he's fetching water from the stream for her anyway," said Anne. 2 huge pails." "There's somebody else, look," said Dick. "Now who would he be? Look at him, going to the stream. He walks like a tiger or a cat, all slinky and powerful." "The man who can set himself free from ropes no matter how he's tied," said Anne. "I'm sure he is." It was most exciting to watch the new arrivals. They all seemed to know one another. They stopped to talk, they laughed, they visited one another's caravans, and finally 3 of the women set off together with baskets. "Going off to shop," said Anne. "That's what I ought to do. Coming, George? There's a bus that goes down to the village in about 10 minutes. "Right," said George. "Call at the post office and see if there are any letters," said Dick. "And don't forget to buy a paper. We may as well find out if anything has happened in the outside world." And off went the girls with Timmy at their heels. The two boys took a walk round the field. They kept a good distance from the snake man, who was doing something peculiar to one of his pythons. "It looks as if he's polishing it, but surely he can't be," said Julian. The snake man was sitting on a box with one snake spread over his knee, some of its coils round one of his legs, the other coils round his waist. The head appeared to be under his armpit. He was rubbing away hard at the snake's scaly body, and it really seemed as if the python was enjoying it. Buffalo was doing something with a whip. It had a magnificent handle set with semi-precious stones that caught the sun and glittered in many colours. "Look at the lash," said Julian. "Yards and yards long. I'd like to see him crack it." Almost as if he heard him, Buffalo got to his feet and swung the great whip in his hand. Then he raised it, and a moment later there was a sound exactly like a pistol shot. The lash cracked as it was whipped through the air, and the two boys jumped, not expecting such a loud noise. A small plump woman came to the steps of Buffalo's caravan. "You mended it yet?" she called. "Perhaps," said Buffalo. "Get a cigarette, Skippy." Skippy put her hand into the caravan, felt along a shelf and brought out a packet of cigarettes. She stood there, holding out the cigarettes between her finger and thumb. Buffalo swung his whip. Crack! The cigarette disappeared as if by magic. The boys stared in amazement. Surely the end of the lash hadn't whipped that cigarette from Skippy's fingers. It didn't seem possible. Buffalo turned his back on Skippy and set to work on his lash again. What he was doing neither of the boys could make out. They went a little nearer to see. Buffalo had his back to them, but he must have heard them coming. "No kids allowed round here," he said, hardly raising his voice. "Clear out, or I'll crack my whip and take the top hairs off your head." Julian and Dick retreated with as much dignity as they could. "I suppose the snake man told him what a disturbance old Timmy made yesterday with the snakes," said Dick. They went across the field, and on the way met Mr. India Rubber. They couldn't help staring at him. He honestly looked as if he were made of rubber. He scowled at the two boys. "Clear out," he said. "No kids allowed in our field." Julian was annoyed. "It's our field as much as yours," he said. "We've got a couple of caravans here, those over there." "Well, this has always been our field," said Mr. India Rubber, "so you clear out to the next one." "We haven't any horses to pull our caravans, even if we wanted to go, which we don't," retorted Julian angrily. "Anyway, why should you object to us? We shan't do you any harm or make a nuisance of ourselves." "Us folk and you folk don't mix," said the man obstinately. "We don't want you here." "Don't let's argue about it," said Dick, who had been looking at the man with the greatest curiosity. "Are you really so rubbery that you can wriggle in and out of pipes and things? Do you—" But he didn't have time to finish his question, because the rubber man flung himself down on the ground, did a few strange contortions, flicked himself between the boys' legs, and there they both were, flat on the ground. The rubber man walked off, looking quite pleased with himself. "Well," said Dick, feeling a bump on his head, "I tried to grab his legs, and they honestly felt like rubber. I say, what a pity these people resent us being in their field. It's not going to be very pleasant to have them all banded against us." "Let's go and meet the girls," said Julian. They went down to the stile and walked to the bus stop. The bus came panting up the hill at that very moment, and the girls stepped off. "I got a paper for you," said Anne, "and George found a letter at the post office from her mother. It's addressed to all of us, so we didn't open it. We'll read it when we get to the caravans." When they had finished their dinner, Julian said, "Now, George, let's hear what Aunt Fanny has got to say in her letter." George unfolded the notepaper and smoothed it out. "It's to all of us," she said. "Dear George, Anne, Julian and Dick, I hope George arrived safely and that you all met her. George, your father is very much upset to read about those two missing scientists. He knows Derek Terry Kane very well and worked with him for some time. He says he is absolutely sure that he isn't a traitor to his country. He thinks he has been spirited away somewhere, and Geoffrey Pottersham too, probably in a plane miles away by now, in a country that will force them to give up their secrets. It's just as well you were off today, because this afternoon your father is striding about all over the place, talking 19 to the dozen and banging every door he comes to. If you write, please don't mention scientists, as I am hoping he will calm down soon. He really is very upset and keeps on saying, what is the world coming to, when he knows quite well that it's coming to exactly what the scientists plan it to come to. Have a good time, all of you. Your loving mother, Aunt Fanny. Funny business about these scientists, isn't it? Said Julian. After all, Terry Kane had planned to leave the country, got his aeroplane ticket and everything. So although your father believes in him, George, it honestly looks a bit fishy, doesn't it? Anything in the paper about it? Asked Dick, and shook it open. Yes, here we are. Missing scientists. It is now certain that Geoffrey Pottersham was in the pay of a country unfriendly to us, and was planning to join Terry Kane on his journey abroad. Nothing has been heard of the two men, although reports that they have been seen in many places abroad have been received. Oh, that rather settles it, said Julian. Look, here are their photographs. The four leaned over the paper, looking at the pictures of the two men. Well, I should have thought anyone would recognise Terry Kane if they saw him, said Anne. Those big, thick, arched eyebrows, and that enormous forehead. The other fellow is very ordinary looking, except for his dome of a head. Let's forget about scientists for now, said Julian. Who's for a walk? Shall we go and see the castle, or shall we leave that for another day? Leave it, said Anne. I honestly don't feel like clambering up that steep hill just now. I think the morning would be a better time. They locked the two caravans and set out. They decided to catch the bus to Tinker's Green and then walk from there to the sea. They would have time to get there and back before dark. The bus was waiting at the corner and they ran to catch it. It was about 2 miles to Tinker's Green, which was a dear little village with a proper green and a duck pond with white ducks swimming on it. It was a lovely walk, down violet-studded lanes and then over a heathery common with clumps of primroses in the hollows. There's the sea. Oh, what a dear little bay, said Anne, in delight. And isn't it blue as cornflowers? Come on, said Julian. Let's get down to the little jetty and have a look at the fishing boats. They spent a very pleasant afternoon looking at the sights and then made their way home. It was getting dark when they got to the stile that led into the caravan field. They climbed over it and made their way slowly to their corner. And then they suddenly stopped and stared. Their 2 caravans were gone. Have a wonderful time. Part 2. For once in a way, Julian was quite at a loss what to do. I suppose we'd better ring up the police, he said at last. Not that that will help us much tonight. We've got to find somewhere to sleep. I think we ought to go and tackle 1 or 2 of the fair folk, said Dick. Even if they've got nothing to do with the theft, they must have seen the caravans being taken away. Yes, I think you're right, said Julian. George, you stay here with Anne. We'll take Timmy. He may be useful. The 2 boys went back up the hill with Timmy close behind. Look, said Dick, there's somebody by a campfire. Let's tackle him about the caravans. They went up to the man who was sitting smoking by the fire. It was Alfredo. "Mr. Alfredo," began Julian, "could you tell us where our 2 caravans have gone? We found them missing when we got back just now." "Ask Buffalo," said Alfredo gruffly, not looking at them. "But don't you know anything about them?" persisted Julian. "Ask Buffalo," said Alfredo again, blowing out clouds of smoke. Julian and Dick turned away, annoyed, and went over to Buffalo's caravan. It was shut. They knocked on the door, and Buffalo appeared, his mop of golden hair gleaming in the lamplight. "Mr. Buffalo," began Julian politely, "Mr. Alfredo told us to come and ask you about our caravans, which are missing, and—" "Ask the rubber man," said Buffalo shortly, and slammed the door. "Is this a silly trick they're playing on us?" said Dick. "Looks like it," said Julian. "Well, we'll try the rubber man. He's the last one we'll try, though." They went to the rubber man's caravan and rapped smartly on the door. "Who's there?" came the voice of Mr. India Rubber. "Our caravans have been stolen," said Julian, raising his voice. "We want to find out who took them. If you won't give us any help, we're going to the police." The door opened, and the rubber man stood on the top of the steps, looking down at Julian. "Nobody has stolen them," he said. "You go and ask the snake man." "If you think we're going round asking every single person in this camp, you're mistaken," said Julian angrily. "I don't want to go to the police. We wanted to be friends with you fair folk, not enemies. But if the caravans have been stolen, we've no other choice but to go to the police, and I don't imagine you would want us to do that." "Your caravans are not stolen," said the rubber man in a very surly voice. "I will show you where they are." He came lightly down the steps of his caravan and walked in front of the 2 boys in the half-darkness. He went across the grassy hillside, making for where the children's caravans had stood. He took them to the hedge that ran at one side of the field. He forced his way through the hedge, and the boys followed. And there, just the other side, 2 big, dark shapes loomed up in the twilight. Caravans! "Well," said Julian, taken aback, "what was the idea of putting the caravans here in the next field?" "Us folk and you folk don't mix," said the man. "We don't like kids messing about. 3 weeks ago we had a canary man with over 100 canaries that gave a show with him, and some kids opened all the cages one night and set them loose." "That was bad luck," said Julian, "but we don't do things like that." "No kids allowed with us now," said the rubber man. "That's why we took your fans down to the field gate and up into the next field. Here they are. We thought you'd be back in the daylight and would see them." Without another word, the rubber man disappeared. They heard him squeezing easily through the hedge. Julian took out the key to his caravan, went up the steps and opened the door. He rummaged about and found his torch. He switched it on and shone it around. Nothing had been disturbed. "Well, so that's that," he said. "Just a bit of spite on the part of the fair folk, punishing us for what those horrid kids did to the canaries." They walked down the hillside to a gap in the hedge through which the vans must have been pulled up the hill. Julian gave a whistle, and George answered it at once. "Julian, what's happened?" "We've got the caravans," shouted back Julian. "They're in this field. The fair folk really have got a hate on against children. Apparently they had a canary man whose show consisted of singing canaries, and some kids set all the birds loose one night, so half of them died, I suppose, and now the fair folk won't have children anywhere near them." "Well, thank goodness we found the vans," said George. "I had a feeling we might have to sleep in a haystack tonight. Do you suppose the farmer will mind us being in his field?" "I never thought of that," said Julian. "It may not be a camping field. I hope to goodness we don't have an angry farmer shouting at us tomorrow." They had rather a solemn meal. Things had suddenly begun to seem rather complicated. They couldn't go to the police about such a silly thing, nor did they want to. But if the farmer wanted to turn them out of his field, how could they go back to their first camping place? Nobody wanted to live in a camp surrounded by enemies. "We'll sleep on it," said Julian at last. "Don't worry, we'll find a way out of this problem." The next morning a loud rapping came on the door of the boys' caravan before they were even awake. Then a large red face looked in at the window. "Who gave you permission to camp here?" said the face, looking as black as thunder. Julian went to the door. "Do you own this field?" he said politely. "Well, we were camping in the next field, and—" "That's let for campers and caravanners," said the man, who was dressed like a farmer. "This isn't." "As I said, we were in the next field," repeated Julian, "and for some reason the fair folk there didn't like us, and when we were out they brought our caravans here. As we've no horses to take them away, we couldn't do anything else but stay." "Well, you can't stay," said the farmer. "I don't let out this field. I use it for my cows. You'll have to go to-day, or I'll put your caravans out into the road." "Yes, but look here," began Julian, and then stopped. The farmer had walked off, a determined figure in riding breeches and tweed coat. The girls opened their window and called to Julian. "We heard what he said," cried George. "Now what are we going to do?" "We're going to have breakfast," said Julian, "and then I'm going to give the fair folk one more chance. They'll have to lend us 2 horses and pull us back into our rightful place. Otherwise, I very much fear I shall have to get help from the police." Breakfast was just as solemn as supper had been. At about 8:30, Julian and Dick set off with Timmy. All the fair people were up and about, and the smoke of their fires rose up in the morning air. Julian thought he would go and tackle the fire-eater, so the 2 boys went towards his caravan. The other fair people looked up, and one by one left their vans or their fires and closed round the boys. Timmy bared his teeth and growled. "Mr. Alfredo," began Julian, "the farmer is turning us out of that field. We must come back here. We want you to lend us 2 horses for our vans." Mr. Alfredo answered politely, with a large smile on his face. "What a pity! We don't hire out our horses." "I don't want to hire them from you," said Julian. "It's up to you to let us have them to bring back our vans." A ripple of laughter spread through the listening people. "Otherwise," Julian continued, "I shall have to go and ask the police for help. Those caravans don't belong to us, you know." There was an angry murmur from the listening crowd. Timmy growled more loudly. 1 or 2 of the fair folk stepped back hurriedly when they heard him. Crack! Julian turned quickly. The fair people ran back, and the 2 boys found that they were facing Buffalo, who, with a large and unpleasant grin on his face, was swinging his whip. Crack! Julian jumped violently, for a few hairs from the top of his head were suddenly whisked off into the air. The end of the lash had neatly cut them away. The crowd laughed loudly. Julian stood there, at a loss to know what to do next. He couldn't bear turning tail and going off to the accompaniment of jeers and howls. He was so full of rage that he couldn't say a word. And then something happened, something so utterly unexpected that nobody did anything at all except let it happen. A boyish figure came running up the grassy hillside, someone very like George, with short curly hair and a very freckled face. She came racing up, yelling at the top of her voice, "Dick! Hey, Dick!" Dick turned and stared in amazement. "Why, it's Jo!" he cried. "The gypsy girl who once got mixed up with us in an adventure." There was no doubt about it at all. It was Jo. She came tearing up, her face glowing with the utmost delight, and flung herself excitedly on Dick. She'd always liked him best. "Dick, I didn't know you were here. Julian, are the others here too? Oh, Timmy, dear old Timmy, are you camping here? Oh, this is really too marvellous to be true." Jo seemed to be about to fling herself on Dick again, and he fended her off. "Jo," he said, "where in the world have you come from?" "Well, you see," said Jo, "I've got school holidays like you, and I thought I'd go and visit you at Kiran Cottage, but you had all gone away together. That was yesterday. I didn't want to go back home again straight away, so I thought I'd pay a visit to my uncle. I knew he was camping here, and I hitchhiked all the way and arrived last night." "Well, I'm blessed," said Julian. "And who is your uncle, may I ask?" "Oh, Alfredo, the fire-eater," was Jo's astonishing reply. "Didn't you know? Oh, Dick, can I stay here with you? Do say I can." Then for the first time Jo realized that something was going on. What was this crowd doing round Julian and Dick? She looked round, and immediately sensed that the fair people were not friendly to the 2 boys, although the main expression on their faces now was one of astonishment. "Uncle Alfredo, where are you?" demanded Jo, looking all round. "Oh, there you are. Uncle, these are my very best friends, and so are the girls too, wherever they are." "I'll just pop back and break the news to George and Anne," said Julian. "They will be surprised to find you here, and that Alfredo is your uncle." The two boys and Timmy turned to go. The little crowd opened to let them pass. It closed up again round the excited Joe, whose high voice the boys could hear all the way across the field. "Well," said Dick as they got through the hedge, "what an astonishing thing! I couldn't believe my eyes when young Joe appeared. Could you? I hope George won't mind. She was always rather jealous of Joe and the things she could do." The two girls were amazed at the boys' news. George was not too pleased. She preferred Joe at a distance rather than near. Joe was too like George herself for George to give her complete friendliness. "Well, fancy Joe being here," said Anne. "It was a good thing she arrived when she did. I don't like that bit about Buffalo cracking his whip at you." "It gave me quite a shock," said Julian, "and I think it gave the fair people a shock too when Joe arrived like a little hurricane. You should have seen the way she flung herself on poor old Dick." "She's not a bad kid," said Dick with a smile. "She's probably singing your praises at this very moment," said George. "She always thought the world of you. Perhaps the fair people won't be quite so unfriendly now. Look, someone's coming through that gap in the hedge down there by the lane. I think it's Joe herself." "Yes," cried Dick, "and my goodness me, she's got a couple of horses with her. Good old Joe! She's got Alfredo's horses." The four of them, with Timmy capering behind, ran to meet Joe. She beamed at everyone. "Hello, Anne. Hello, George. Pleased to meet you again." "Joe, how did you get those horses?" asked Dick. "I just told Uncle Fredo all about you," grinned Joe. "What wonders you were, and all you did for me. And wasn't I shocked when I heard they'd turned you out of your field. I told them just what I thought of them, treating my best friends like that. When I explained how my father went to prison and you got me a home with somebody nice who looks after me, they were sorry they'd treated you roughly. And so I told Uncle Fredo I was going to catch 2 horses and bring your caravans back into the field again." "I see," said Julian. "And the fair folk just let you?" "Oh, yes," said Joe. "So let's hitch them in, Julian, and go back at once." They hitched up the horses and drove the caravans up to the field gate, which Anne opened. In went the horses, straining now because they were going uphill and the vans were very heavy. At last they arrived in the corner where the vans had stood before. Julian backed them over the same bit of ground. He unhitched the horses and threw the reins over the second horse to Dick. The two boys walked the horses over to Alfredo, who was pegging up some washing on a line. "Mr. Alfredo, thank you for lending us the horses," said Julian in his politest tones. "Shall we tie them up anywhere or set them loose?" Alfredo turned round and took some pegs out of his mouth. He looked rather ashamed. "Set them loose," he said. "We didn't know you were friends of my niece. She told us all about you. You should have told us you knew her." "And how could he do that when he didn't know she was your niece?" shouted Mrs. Alfredo from the caravan door. She came out and said to the two boys, "Alfredo is sorry he took your caravans away. Are you not glad that you are back again in your corner?" "I should have felt gladder if you had all been friendly to us," said Julian. "I'm afraid we don't feel like stopping here any longer. We shall probably leave tomorrow." "Now there, Fredo, see what you have done," cried Mrs. Alfredo. "You have chased away these nice children." Julian and Dick turned to go. Alfredo spoke to them in a low voice. "You can stay here now, here in this field. You're Joe's friends. That's enough for us." "It may be," said Julian, "but it's not quite enough for us, I'm afraid." The boys went back to the caravans. Joe sat on the grass with George and Anne, eagerly telling them of her life with a very nice family. "But they won't let me wear shorts or be a boy," she ended sadly. "That's why I wear a skirt now. Can I stay with you? I won't sleep in the caravans. I'll doss down underneath. I always did that when the weather was fine, and I live with my dad in his caravan." "Well, you could stay here with us if we were going to stay," said Julian, "but I don't feel inclined to, now that we've had such an unfriendly welcome from everyone." "I'll tell everyone to be kind to you," said Joe. "Well," said Dick, "we'll stay here one more day and night and make up our minds tomorrow. What do you say, Julian?" "All right," said Julian. "I've practically made up my mind, but we'll wait just till tomorrow." They had a wonderful lunch on the grass by their caravans, and to their surprise Mrs. Alfredo presented them with a sponge sandwich she had made. Anne thanked her very much indeed, to make up for a certain stiffness in the thanks of the two boys. "You might have said a bit more," she said reproachfully to them. "She really is a kind little woman. Honestly, I wouldn't mind staying on now." But Julian was curiously obstinate about it. "We go tomorrow," he said, "unless something unexpected happens to make us stay. And it won't." But Julian was quite wrong. Something unexpected did happen. Something really very peculiar indeed. The unexpected happening came that evening after tea. They had all had rather a late tea and a very nice one. "I can't eat a thing more," said George. "That sponge cake was too rich for words. I don't even feel as if I can get up and clear away, so don't start suggesting it, Anne." "I'm not," said Anne. "There's plenty of time. It's a heavenly evening. Let's sit for a while." "Oh, look, Dick. Are those herons flying down to the marsh on the east side of the castle hill?" "Yes," said Dick, sitting up. "Where are your field glasses, George?" George fetched them from her caravan. She handed them to Dick. He focused on the marsh. "Yes," he said, "4 herons. They're on the marsh now, wading happily about. One struck down at something with its great beak. It's a frog. I can see its back legs." "You can't," said George, taking the field glasses from him. "The glasses aren't powerful enough to see a frog's legs all that way off." But they were powerful enough. They were really magnificent ones, far too good for George, who wasn't very careful with valuable things. She was just in time to see the poor frog's legs disappearing into the big strong beak of the heron. Then something frightened the birds, and before the others could have a look at them, they'd all flapped away. "Give me the glasses again, George," said Dick. "I'll have a squint at the jackdaws. There are thousands of them flying again over the castle." He put the field glasses to his eyes and moved them to and fro, watching the endless whirl and swoop of the blackbirds. The sound of their many voices came loudly over the evening air. Dick saw some fly down to the only complete tower of the castle. He lowered the glasses to follow them. One jackdaw flew down to the sill of the slit window near the top of the tower, and Dick followed its flight. It rested for half a second on the sill and then flew off as if frightened. And then Dick saw something that made his heart suddenly jump. "Julian, take the glasses, will you?" he said. "Train them on the window slit near the top of the only complete tower and tell me if you see what I see." Julian put the glasses to his eyes and focused them on the window Dick had been looking at. He stared hard. Yes, I can. What an extraordinary thing. It must be an effect of the light, I think." By this time the others were in such a state of curiosity that they couldn't bear it. George snatched the glasses from Julian. "Let me see," she said quite fiercely. She trained the glasses on the window. Then she lowered them and stared at Julian and Dick. "There's nothing there," she said. "Nothing but an empty window." Dick took the glasses from her at once, focusing them once more on the window. He lowered them and said, "It's gone. Nothing there now." "Dick," said George crossly, "if you don't tell us what you saw, we'll roll you down the hill." "Well," said Dick, looking at Julian, "I saw a face not far from the window staring out. What did you see, Julian?" "Same," said Julian. "A face," said George, Anne and Joe all together. "But nobody lives in the castle. It's a ruin," said George. "Was it someone exploring, do you think?" Julian looked at his watch. "No. It couldn't have been a visitor, I'm sure. The castle shuts at 5:30, and it's gone 6. And anyway, it looked a sort of desperate face." "Yes, I thought so too," said Dick. "There may be some kind of ordinary explanation for it, but I can't help feeling there's something strange about it." "Was it a man's face?" asked George. "Yes," said Dick. "I couldn't see any hair against the darkness inside the window, or clothes, but it looked like a man's face. Did you notice the eyebrows, Julian?" "Yes, I did," said Julian. "They were very pronounced." This rang a bell with George. "Eyebrows," she said at once. "Don't you remember? The picture of that scientist, Terry Kane, showed that he had thick black eyebrows." "Yes, I do remember," said Dick. "I didn't recognise the likeness, but after all, it's a very long way away. It's only because George's glasses are so extraordinarily good that we managed to spot a face looking out of a window so very far away." "I tell you what we might do," said Julian. "We could go and see over the castle ourselves tomorrow, and we could go up into that tower. Then we should certainly see if there's a face there." "But I thought we were leaving tomorrow," said Dick. "Oh, yes, we did think of leaving, didn't we?" said Julian, who had quite forgotten this idea of his in the excitement. "Well, I don't feel we can go before we've explored that castle and found the explanation of the face." "Of course we can't," said George. "Fancy seeing a thing like that and rushing off without finding out about it." Next morning, during breakfast, the children could talk of nothing but the face at the castle window. "Let's go over and see the castle as soon as it opens," said Dick. Julian looked at his watch. "All right," he said, "but it's too soon to go yet." "I'm going to help Mr. Slither with his snakes," said Joe. "Anyone else coming?" "Mr. Slither! What a marvellous name for a man who keeps snakes," said Dick. "I don't mind coming to watch, but I'm not keen on the way they paw themselves up and down people." They all went to Mr. Slither's caravan except Anne, who said she would much rather clear up the breakfast things. The snake man had both his snakes out of their box. "He is polishing them," said Julian. "Here, Joe, you mop Beauty for me," said Mr. Slither. "The stuff is in that bottle over there. He's got those nasty little mites under his scales again. Mop him with that stuff and that'll soon get rid of them." Joe got a rag, tipped up the bottle of yellow stuff and began to pat one of the snakes gently, letting the lotion soak round his scales. The two boys went off to where Buffalo was practising spinning rope rings. He spun loop after loop, making wonderful patterns in the air with it. He grinned at the boys. "Like a try?" he said, but neither of them could do anything with the rope at all. "Let's see you snap off something with the whiplash," said Dick. "I think you're a marvel at that." "What do you want me to hit?" asked Buffalo, picking up his magnificent whip. "The topmost leaves off that bush?" "Yes," said Dick. Buffalo looked at them, swung his whip once or twice, lifted it and cracked it. Like magic, the topmost leaves disappeared off the bush. The boys gazed in admiration. "Jolly good," said Dick. "Does it take long to learn a thing like that?" "Matter of 20 years or so," said Buffalo. "I throw knives too. I put Skippy up against a board and throw knives all round her, so that when she walks away from the board at the end, there's her shape all outlined in knives. Like to see me do it?" "Well, no, not now," said Julian, looking at his watch. "We're going to see over the castle. George, Joe, it's time to be getting along. Are you ready?" Mr. Slither collected up his snakes. They glided over him in delight, and he ran his hands over their smooth, gleaming bodies. They collected Anne from her caravan and walked down the hillside. They climbed over the stile, walked up the lane a little way, and came to the wooden gate that opened onto the steep path up to the castle. On they went, up the path, and came to the small tower in which was the little door giving entrance to the castle. An old woman stood there, looking a little like a witch. She had eyes like black beads and no teeth at all, so that it was difficult to understand what she said. "5, please," said Julian, giving her 25 pence. "Can't take that dog in," said the old woman. She pointed to a set of printed rules. "No dogs allowed." "All right, we'll leave him outside then," said George crossly. "What a silly rule. Timmy, stay here. We won't be long." Timmy put his tail down and flopped down in a sunny corner. The 5 children went in through the clicking turnstile. They opened the door beyond and went into the castle grounds. The door shut behind them. "We ought to get a guidebook," said Julian. "I want to know something about that tower." He went back and bought a guidebook. When he returned, they stood in the great castle yard and looked at the book. It gave the history of the old place, a history of peace and war, quarrels and truces, and all the other things that make up history. Julian looked at the guidebook. It always had the strong wall that is still around it. The walls of the castle itself are 8 feet thick. They looked at the silent ruins in awe. The castle towered up, broken here and there, with sometimes a whole wall missing, and with all the doorways misshapen. "There were 4 towers, of course," said Julian, still with his nose glued to the guidebook. "It says 3 are almost completely ruined now, but the 4th one is in fairly good condition, though the stone stairway that led up to the top has fallen in." "Well then," said George, "we couldn't have seen a face at that window. If the stairway has fallen in, no one could get up there." "We'll see how much has fallen in," said Julian. "It might be quite climbable in places." They walked round the courtyard that surrounded the castle. It was strewn with great white stones that had fallen from the walls of the castle itself. In one place a whole wall had fallen in, and they could see the inside of the castle, dark and forbidding. They came round to the front of it again. "Let's go in at the front door," said Julian, "if you can call that great stone archway that." They went in at the arched entrance and wandered through room after room with stone floors and walls, and small slit-like windows that gave very little light indeed. They went to the only good tower. They had hoped to find some remains of a stone stairway, but to their great disappointment they couldn't even look up into the tower. One of the inner walls had fallen in, and the floor was piled up, completely blocked. There was no sign of a stairway. Julian was astonished. It was obvious that nobody could possibly climb up the tower from the inside. Then how in the world could there have been a face at the tower window? "Let's go and ask that old woman if there is any way at all of getting up into the tower," said Julian. Five Have a Wonderful Time, Part 3. They left the castle and walked across the courtyard back to the little tower in the castle wall that guarded the big gateway. The old woman was sitting by the turnstile knitting. "Could you tell us if there is any way of getting up into the tower over there?" asked Julian. The old woman muttered something, but it was very difficult to understand a word she said. However, as she shook her head vigorously, it was plain that there was no way up the tower. "Is there a better plan of the castle than this?" asked Julian, showing his guidebook. "A plan of the towers as they once were before they were ruined." The woman opened a big book that showed the details of visitors and fees paid, and looked down at it. She put her finger on something written there and showed it to Julian. "Society for Preservation of Old Buildings," he read. "Did somebody come from them lately?" "Yes," said the old woman. "2 men came. They spent all day here last Thursday. You ask that society what you want to know, not me. I only take the money." "We'll telephone the society," said Julian, "and ask them if they can tell us any more about the castle. There may be secret passages and things not shown in the guidebook at all." "How exciting," said George, thrilled. "I say, let's go back to that tower and look at the outside of it. It might be climbable there." They went back to see, but it wasn't climbable. Although the stones it was built of were uneven enough to form slight footholds and handholds, it would be much too dangerous for anyone to try and climb up. And then, to everyone's enormous astonishment, who should come bounding up to them but Timmy. "Timmy, where have you come from?" said George in surprise. "There's no way in, except through the turnstile, and the door behind it is shut." Timmy ran to the good tower, made his way over the blocks of stone lying about, stopped by a small space between 3 or 4 of the fallen stones, and pawed at one of them. "He came out there," said George. She tugged at the big stone, but she couldn't move it an inch. "I don't know how in the world Timmy squeezed out of this space," she said. "It doesn't look big enough for a rabbit. Certainly none of us could get inside." "What puzzles me," said Julian, "is how Timmy got in from the outside." We left him right outside the castle, so he must have run round the outer wall somewhere and found a small hole and squeezed through that." "Well, we know the walls are 8 feet thick," said Dick, "so he must have found a place where a bit of it had broken at the bottom and forced his way in. But would there be a hole right through the entire thickness of 8 feet? They all looked at Timmy, and he wagged his tail expectantly. Then he barked loudly and capered round as if he wanted a game. The door behind the turnstile opened at once and the old lady appeared. "How did that dog get in here?" she called. "He's to go out at once." "We don't know how he got in," said Dick. "Is there a hole in the outer wall?" "No," said the old woman. "You must have let that dog in when I wasn't looking. He's to go out, and you too. You've been here long enough." "We may as well go," said Julian. "We've seen all there is to see, or all that we're allowed to see. I'm quite sure there's some way of getting up into that tower, even though the stairway is in ruins. I'm going to ring up the Society for the Preservation of Old Buildings and ask them to put me in touch with the fellows who examined the castle last week." They took Timmy by the collar and went out through the turnstile. "I feel like having a couple of doughnuts at the dairy," said George, "and some lemonade." They walked down to the village, and Julian said, "You go and order what we want, and I'll just go and look up this society. It may have an office somewhere in this district." He went to the post office to use the telephone there, and the rest of them trooped in at the door of the bright little dairy. The plump shopwoman welcomed them beamingly. They were each on their second doughnut when Julian came back. "Any news?" asked Dick. "Yes," said Julian. "Peculiar news, though. I found the address of the society. They've got a branch about 50 miles from here that deals with all the old buildings for a radius of 100 miles. I asked if they had any recent booklets about the castle. They said they hadn't. The last time they had checked over Knight's castle was 2 years ago." "But what about those 2 men who came from the society last week?" said George. "That's what I said," answered Julian. "And here's the peculiar bit. They said they didn't know what I was talking about. Nobody had been sent there from the society recently." "Then those men were examining the castle for their own reasons," said Dick. "Yes," said Julian, "and I can't help thinking that the face at the window and those 2 men have something to do with one another. It's quite clear that the men had nothing whatever to do with any official society. They merely gave it as an excuse because they wanted to find out what kind of hiding place the castle had." "Then there was a real face at that tower window, and there is a way of getting up there," said Anne. "Yes," said Julian. "I know it sounds very far-fetched, but I do think there is just a possibility that those 2 scientists have gone there. I don't know if you read it in the paper, but one of them, Geoffrey Pottersham, has written a book on famous ruins. He would know all about Knight's castle, because it's a very well-known one. If they wanted to hide somewhere till the hue and cry had died down and then escape to another country—" "They could hide in the tower," cried Dick, "and then slip out quietly from the castle one night, go down to the sea and hire a fishing boat." "I rather think I'll telephone Uncle Quentin about this," said Julian. "I feel this is all rather too important to manage on our own. Those men may have extremely important secrets." Everyone began to feel distinctly excited. "I think I'll catch the bus into the next town," said Julian. "The telephone box here is too easily overheard. I'd rather go to a kiosk somewhere in a street where nobody can hear what I'm saying." "All right," said Dick. "You go. We'll do some shopping and go back to the caravans." Julian went off to the bus stop. The others wandered in and out of the few village shops, doing their marketing. They went back to the camp and spent a very interesting day because the fair folk, eager to make up for their unfriendly behaviour, made them all feel very welcome. At last Julian returned. "Sorry I'm so late," he said, "but first of all I couldn't get any answer, so I waited a bit in case Aunt Fanny and Uncle Quentin were out, and I had lunch while I waited. Then I telephoned again, and Aunt Fanny was in, but Uncle Quentin had gone to London and wouldn't be back till tonight." "To London?" said George, astonished. "He hardly ever goes to London." "Apparently he went up about those 2 missing scientists," said Julian. "He's so certain that his friend Terry Kane isn't a traitor, and he went up to tell the authorities so. Well, I couldn't wait till tonight, of course." "Didn't you report our news then?" said Dick, disappointed. "Yes," "Yes," said Julian. "Aunt Fanny said she would repeat it all to Uncle Quentin when he comes back." After tea, they sat on the hillside again, basking in the sun. Julian looked over to the ruined castle opposite. He fixed his eyes on the tower where they had seen the face. It was so far away that he could only just make out the window slit. "Get your glasses, George," he said. "We may as well have another squint at that window." George fetched them. She would not give them to Julian first, though. She put them to her own eyes and gazed at the window. At first she saw nothing, and then quite suddenly a face appeared at the window. George was so astonished that she cried out. Julian snatched the glasses from her. He focused them on the window and saw the face at once. Yes, the same as yesterday, eyebrows and all. It did not move at all, as far as he could see, but simply stared. It suddenly disappeared and didn't come back again. "Well, we didn't imagine it yesterday then," he said. "It's there all right, and where there's a face there should be a body." "Do you suppose the fellow, whoever he is being kept prisoner up there?" said Dick. "It looks like it," said Julian. "But how in the world did he get there?" "I think we ought to go up to the castle," said Dick, "and yell up to the fellow. He might be able to yell back or throw a message out." "He would have thrown a message out before now if he'd been able to," said Julian. "As for yelling, he'd have to lean right out of that thick-walled window to make himself heard. He's right at the back of it, remember, and the slit is very deep." "Can't we go and find out something?" said George, who was longing to take some action. "After all, Timmy got in somewhere, and we might be able to as well." "It's quite an idea," said Julian. "Timmy did find a way in, and it might be the way that leads up to the top of the tower." "Let's go then," said George at once. "Not now," said Julian. "We'd be seen if we scrambled about on the hill outside the castle walls. We'd have to go at night. We could go when the moon comes up." A shiver of excitement ran through the group. The sun went down, and the air grew rather cold. They went into the boys' caravan and played cards, not feeling at all sleepy. Jo was very bad at cards and soon stopped playing. She sat watching, her arm round Timmy's neck. They had a supper of sausage rolls and tinned strawberries. They waited till the moon went behind a cloud, and then, like moving shadows, made their way down the hillside as fast as they could. Up the steep slope to the castle they went, but when they came to the little tower, where the turnstile was, they went off to the right and walked round the foot of the great thick walls. "Now, Timmy, listen," said George. "We want you to show us how you got in." Timmy waved his long tail and ran in front, sniffing. Then he suddenly stopped and looked back. He gave a little whine. The others hurried up to him. Julian took out his torch and shone it where Timmy stood. The dog stood there looking very pleased. "Well, what is there to be pleased about, Timmy?" said Julian, puzzled. "There's no hole here. Nowhere you could possibly have got in." Timmy gave a little bark. Then he suddenly leapt about 4 feet up the uneven stones of the wall and disappeared. Julian flashed his torch up. "Say, look," he said. "There's a stone missing up there, quite a big block, and Timmy's gone in at the hole." "There's the block fallen down the hillside," said Dick, pointing to a big white stone, roughly square in shape. "But how has Timmy got in? This wall is frightfully thick, and even if one stone falls out, there must be plenty more behind." Julian climbed up. He came to the space where the great fallen stone had been and flashed his torch there. "The wall is hollow just here," he called. "Can we get in and follow Timmy?" said George. "Shout to him, Julian, and see where he is." Julian called into the hollow. "Timmy! Timmy, where are you?" A distant, rather muffled bark answered him, and then Timmy's eyes suddenly gleamed up at Julian. The dog was standing down in the small hollow behind the fallen stone. "He's here," called back Julian. "I tell you what I think we've hit on. When this enormous wall was built, a space was left inside, either to save stones or to make a hidden passage, and that fallen stone has exposed a bit of it." Julian climbed down into the middle of the wall. He flashed his torch into the space he was standing in. "Yes," he called, "it's a kind of passage. It's small, though. Anne, you come in next, then I can help you." Soon they were all in the curious passage, which ran along the centre of the wall. It was pitch dark, and although they all had torches, except Joe, it was very difficult to see. Julian suddenly stopped, and everyone bumped into the one in front. "What's up?" called Dick from the back. "Steps here," shouted back Julian. "Steps going down, very, very steeply, almost like a stone ladder. Be careful, everybody." The steps went down for about 10 feet. At the bottom was another passage, wider and higher. "This passage is at right angles to the wall," said Julian. "We've left the wall now. We're going underneath part of the courtyard, I should think." The passage seemed to run quite straight, and after about 80 feet of it, Julian stopped again. "Steps up again," he called. They went carefully up the steep stone steps and found themselves in a very small room that appeared to be hollowed out of the wall of the castle itself. Julian stopped in surprise, and everyone crowded into the tiny room. A narrow bench stood at one side with a shelf above it. An old pitcher stood on the shelf, and on the bench was a small dagger, rusty and broken. "This is a secret room," said Julian. "We're inside one of the walls of the castle itself." Dick flashed his torch round to see if he could spot anything else. He gave a sudden exclamation and kept his torch fixed on a corner of the room. "Paper," he said. "Red and blue silver paper. Chocolate wrapping. How many times have we bought this kind of chocolate, wrapped in silver paper patterned with red and blue?" He picked it up and straightened it out. Everyone was silent. This could only mean one thing. Someone had been in this room lately, someone who had thrown down the wrapping, never expecting it to be found. "Well," said Julian, breaking the silence, "this is surprising. Someone else knows this way in." A passage led from the strange hidden room. It went along on the level for a little way, and then they arrived at a spiral stairway that ran upwards like a corkscrew. At the top they came to a small, very narrow door. It had a great, old-fashioned iron ring for a handle. Julian took hold of it cautiously and turned it. The door opened silently. Julian found himself on a small gallery that seemed to run all the way round the inside of the tower. The moon shone in through a slit window, and Julian could just make out that he must be looking down from a gallery into the darkness of a tower room. As the others followed him, he whispered, "We've come out to a gallery which overlooks one of the rooms inside the tower. It may be a second-floor room, because we know that the ceiling of the first floor has fallen in, or perhaps it's even the third floor." "Is there any way up from this gallery?" whispered George. "We'll walk round it and see," said Julian. "Be as quiet as you can. I don't think there's anyone here, but you never know." Julian led the way. About 3/4 of the way round the gallery there was another door set in the wall, very like the one they had just come through. It, too, had an iron ring for a handle. There was a great key standing in the lock, and Julian turned it. The door remained shut, and then Julian saw that it was bolted and the bolt was securely pushed home. So somebody was a prisoner on the other side. Was it the man who owned the face? Julian turned and whispered very softly, "There's a door here, bolted my side. Looks as if we're coming to the face. George, send up Timmy." George pushed Timmy forward. He stood by Julian, sensing the sudden excitement. Julian slid back the bolt very cautiously. He pushed the door and it opened. He stood listening. His torch switched off. Then he switched it on. Just as he had thought, another stone stairway led up steeply. "We'll go up," he said softly, "and everybody keep as quiet as possible." With his hand on Timmy's collar, he went up the steep and narrow stairway. The others followed with hardly a sound. At the top was another door. From behind it came a curious noise, guttural and growling. "Somebody's snoring," said Julian. "I'll take a peep in and see who it is." The door in front of him was not locked. He pushed it open and looked inside. The moonlight struck through a narrow window and fell on the face of a sleeping man. Julian stared at it in rising excitement. Those eyebrows! Yes, this was the man whose face had appeared at the window. "It is is Terry Kane, he thought, moving like a shadow into the room. He's exactly like the pictures we saw in the papers. He looked cautiously round the room, but could see no one else. He listened. There was only the snoring of the man lying in the moonlight. He switched on his torch and swept it round the tower room, its beam piercing the black corners. No one was there except the one man, and, with a sudden shock, Julian saw that he was tied with ropes. If this was Terry Kane, then his uncle must be right. The man was no traitor. He had been kidnapped and was a prisoner. Everyone was now in the room, staring at the sleeping man. Julian went over to him and shook him by the shoulder. He woke up at once and stared at the children in amazement. Then he struggled up to a sitting position. "Who are you?" he said. "How did you get here?" "Are you Mr. Terry Kane?" asked Julian. "Yes, I am," said the man. "We're staying on the hill opposite the castle," said Julian. "We saw your face at the window through our field glasses, so we came to find you." "But how do you know who I am?" said the man. "We read about you in the papers," said Julian, "and we saw your picture. We couldn't help noticing your eyebrows, sir. We even saw them through the glasses." "Can you undo me?" said the man eagerly. "I must escape. Tomorrow night my enemies are smuggling me out of here, into a car and down to the sea, and a boat is being hired to take me across to the continent. They want me to tell them what I know about my latest experiments." "I'll cut the ropes," said Julian, and he took out his pocket-knife. He cut the knots that tied Terry Kane's wrists together and then freed his legs. "How did you manage to get to the window?" he asked. "Each evening one of the men who brought me here comes to bring me food and drink," said Terry Kane. "He undoes my hand so that I can feed myself. He sits and smokes while I eat, taking no notice of me. I drag myself over to the window to have a breath of fresh air. I can't stay there long, because I'm soon tied up again, of course." "It's a good thing you did get to the window for a breath of air," said Julian, "or we'd never have found you." "Julian, I can hear a noise," said Joe suddenly. "Where?" said Julian, turning sharply. "Downstairs," whispered Joe. "Wait, I'll go and see." She slipped out of the door and down the steep little stairs. She came to the door at the bottom, the one that led into the gallery. Someone was coming up the gallery, Joe thought quickly. If she darted back up the stairs to warn the others, this newcomer might go up there too, and they would all be caught. He could bolt the door at the top and have 6 prisoners instead of 1. She decided to crouch down on the floor of the gallery, a little beyond the door that led upwards. Footsteps came loudly along the gallery and up to the door. Then the stranger obviously found the door unbolted and stopped in consternation. He stood perfectly still, listening. Joe didn't dare call out to warn the others. And then she heard Julian's voice calling quietly down the stone stairs. "Joe! Joe! Where are you?" She heard Julian coming down to find her, and behind him Terry Kane and Dick with the girls and Timmy following. The stranger down at the door was even more amazed to hear voices and footsteps. He slammed the door suddenly and rammed the stout bolt home. The footsteps on the stairs stopped in alarm. "Hey, Joe, is that you?" called Julian's voice. "Open the door." The stranger spoke angrily. "The door's bolted. Who are you?" There was a silence. Then Terry Kane answered. "So, you're back again, Pottisham. Open that door at once." So the other scientist is here too, thought Julian. Geoffrey Pottisham. He must have got Terry Kane here by kidnapping him. But what can have happened to Joe, I wonder? The man at the door spoke again. "Who set you free? Who's that with you?" "Now listen, Pottisham," said Terry Kane's voice. "I've had enough of this nonsense. You must be out of your mind acting like this, doping me and kidnapping me. There are 4 children here who saw my face at the window and came to investigate and—" "Children?" said Pottisham, taken aback. "How did they get up to this tower? I'm the only one who knows the way in. All right, I'm going off to get fresh orders. It looks as if we'll have to take those kids with us, Terry Kane. They'll be sorry they saw your face at the window." He turned and went back the way he had come. Joe guessed that he knew the same way in as they had happened on. She waited until she felt it was perfectly safe, and then she ran to the door again. She hammered on it. "Dick! Dick! Come down! Where are you?" She heard an answering shout from up the stairs behind the door, and then Dick came running down. "Joe! Unbolt the door, quick!" Joe unbolted it, but it wouldn't open. Julian called out to Joe. "Turn the key, Joe. The door may be locked too." "The key's gone," cried Joe. "He must have locked it as well as bolting it, and he's taken the key. How can I get you out?" "You can't," said Dick. Still, you're free, Joe. You can go and tell the police. Buck up now. You know the way, don't you? I haven't got a torch, said Joe. Oh, dear. Well, we can't possibly get one of ours out to you, said Dick. You'd better wait till morning, then. You may lose yourself down in those dark passages. All right, said Joe. I'll curl up in the gallery here. It's quite warm. Well, be careful, said Dick. We'll go back to the room upstairs. Call us if you want us. Joe curled up on the gallery floor, but she couldn't sleep. For one thing, the floor was very hard, and the stone was very, very cold. She suddenly thought of the little room where they had seen the chocolate wrapping paper. That would be a far better place to sleep. She could lie on the bench. She stood up and made her way cautiously to the door. She felt for the iron ring, turned it and opened the door. It was very dark, and she could see nothing at all in front of her. She put out her foot carefully. Was she at the top of the spiral staircase? She found that she was. She held out her hands on either side, touching the stone walls of the curious little stairway, and went slowly down, step by step. She came to the end of the spiral staircase at last, and went through the doorway of the secret room without knowing it because it was so dark. She groped her way along, and suddenly felt the edge of the bench. Then poor Joe got a dreadful shock. A pair of strong arms went round her and held her fast. She screamed and struggled, her heart beating in wild alarm, and then a torch was switched on and held to her face. "You must be Joe, I suppose," said Pottersham's voice. "I wondered who you were when one of the kids yelled out for you. I thought you must be wandering somewhere about, and I guessed you'd come this way, so I sat on the bench and waited for you." "Let me go," said Joe fiercely, and she struggled like a wild cat. "I'm going to tie you up," said Pottersham, "and I'll leave you here in the dark till I come back again." He took a rope from round his waist and proceeded to tie Joe up so thoroughly that she could hardly move. Her hands were fastened behind her back and her legs tied at knees and ankles. "Now I'm going," said Pottersham. Joe heard his footsteps going off in the distance. Now she couldn't get help for the others. In fact, she was much worse off than they were because she was tied up and they weren't. She dozed off, exhausted by the night's excitement and her fierce struggle. When she awoke, she felt better. She forced herself into a sitting position and made herself think clearly and slowly. If only she had a knife. She could manage to get it between her finger and thumb and perhaps use it to cut the rope somehow. She suddenly lost her patience and flung her head back on the bench, straining and pulling at the rope. She knocked against something and it fell to the stone floor with a clatter. She realized that it was the rusty old dagger. She swung herself round on the floor till she felt the dagger under her, and then rolled over on her back and tried to pick it up with her finger and thumb. After several attempts, she at last managed to get hold of it. She sat up, bent forward, and did her best to force the rusty dagger up and down a little on the rope that tied her hands behind her. She could hardly move at all because her hands were so tightly tied, but she persevered. She grew so tired that she had to give it up for a little while. Then she tried again, and this time she was lucky. The rope suddenly frayed and broke. She pulled hard and her hands were free. She undid the tight knots around her legs and freed them too. Then she tried to stand up and was surprised to find that her legs were shaky, but they soon felt better and she got to her feet. "Now, to find my way out," she said. "How I wish I had a torch." She went carefully down the flight of stone steps that led down from the room and then came to the wide passage that ran under the courtyard. She went along it, glad it was level, and then she came once again to the stone steps that led upwards. Up she climbed, knowing that she was going the right way, although she was in the dark. Now she came to the small passage where she had to bend almost double, the one that ran through the centre of the thick outer walls. She saw daylight before she came to the place where the stone was missing. It appeared as a misty little patch some way in front of her. She stumbled along to it and climbed up to the hole from which the stone had fallen. Then she sat there drinking in the sunlight. After the darkness of the passages, she felt quite dazed. Then she suddenly realized how very high the sun was in the sky. It must be well into morning already. She leapt down from the hole and ran down the steep hillside. When she came to the lane, she crossed it and made her way to the caravan field. "I'll go to Uncle Fredo," she thought. "He'll know what to do." She was going up the field when she saw someone strange there. Could it be that horrid man who had tied her up? She had not seen him at all clearly, and she was very much afraid it might be him. She saw that he was talking urgently to some of the fair folk. She went a bit nearer and found that he was asking where Julian and the rest were. He was becoming very angry with the fair people because they assured him that they did not know where the children had gone. "It's the man they call Pottersham," said Jo to herself, and dived under a caravan. "He's come to find out how much we've told anyone about that face." Five Have a Wonderful Time, Part 4. She hid till he had gone away down the hillside to the lane, very red in the face and shouting out that he would get the police. She crawled out, and the fair folk crowded round her at once. "Where have you been?" they shouted. "Where are the others? That man wanted to know all about you. He sounds quite mad." "He's a bad man," said Jo. "I'll tell you all about him, and where the others are. We've got to rescue them." Whereupon Jo launched into her story with the greatest zest, beginning in the middle, then going back to the beginning, putting in things she'd forgotten and thoroughly muddling everyone. When she had finished, they all stared at her in excitement. "You mean to say that those kids are locked up in that tower over there," said Alfredo, "and a spy is with them?" "No, he's not a spy," explained Jo. "He's a good man, a scientist. That man who left just now is a bad man. He is a spy. He kidnapped the good man up in the tower there to take him away to another country, and he tied me up like I told you." Buffalo cracked his whip and made everyone jump. "We will rescue them," he said. "This is no police job. It is our job." "Look," said Skippy suddenly, "that scientist is coming back." And sure enough, there he was, coming hurriedly up the field to ask some more questions. "We'll get him," muttered Buffalo. All the fair folk waited in silence for the man to come up. Then they closed round him solidly and began to walk up the hill. The man was taken with them. He couldn't help himself. He was walked behind a caravan, and before the crowd had come apart again, he was on the ground, neatly roped by the rope man. "Well, we've got you," said the rope man, "and now we'll get on to the next bit of our business." The man was put into an empty caravan with windows and doors shut, because he shouted so loudly. Then everyone in the camp held a conference. "How shall we rescue them?" asked Skippy. "Well," said Jo, "the door leading to the tower room is locked, as I told you, but that man has got the key." "Ah," said Buffalo, springing up at once. "You didn't tell us that before. I will get it from him." In a minute or two he came out of the caravan and said, "He has no key on him. He says he never had. He says we're all mad and he will get the police." "Well, we can't get in through the door that leads to the tower room then," said the snake man. "Is there any other way into the room?" "Only by the window," said Jo. "It's far too high for any ladder. Anyway, we've got to get into the courtyard first. We'll have to climb over the high castle wall." "That's easy," said the rubber man. "I can climb any wall." "Can anyone get into or out of the slip window?" asked Buffalo. "Oh, yes, it's bigger than you think," said Jo. "It's very deep. The walls are so thick, you see. But, Buffalo, how can anyone get up to that window?" "It can be done," said Buffalo. "Can you lend us a peg rope, Jackie?" "Yes," said the rope man. Jo knew what a peg rope was, a thick rope with pegs thrust through the strands to act as footholds. "But how will you get the peg rope up?" said Jo. "It can be done," said Buffalo. "We set off tonight as soon as darkness comes. You will not come, Jo. This is man's business." "Of course I'm coming," said Joe. "They're my friends, aren't they?" "You are not coming," said Buffalo, and Joe immediately made up her mind to disappear before the men set off and hide somewhere so that she might follow them. When darkness came, a little company set out from the camp. Buffalo led the way down the hill, looking extremely fat because he was wound about with a great deal of peg rope. Then came Mr. Slither with one of his pythons draped round him. Then the rubber man with Alfredo. Buffalo also carried his whip, though nobody knew quite why. Behind them, like a little shadow, slipped Joe. The little company went over the stile, into the lane and up the path to the castle. They came to the wall. The rubber man took a jump at it and literally seemed to run up it, fling himself onto the top, roll over and disappear. There was a low whistle from the other side of the wall. Buffalo unwound a thin rope from his waist, tied a stone to it and flung it over. The rope slithered after the stone and over the wall like a long, thin worm. Buffalo then undid the peg rope from his waist, and he and the others held out its length between them, standing one behind the other. One end was fastened to the thin rope, whose other end held the stone. The rubber man, on the other side of the wall, began to pull on the thin rope. When all the slack was taken in, the peg rope began to go up the wall too, because it was tied to the thin rope and had to follow it. Joe watched. Yes, that was clever. But to get the peg rope up to the slit window would not be so easy. A whistle came again. Buffalo let go the peg rope, and it swung flat against his side of the wall. He tugged it. It was firm. Evidently the rubber man had tied it fast to something. It was safe to go up. Buffalo went up first, using the pegs as footholds and pulling himself up by the rope between the pegs. Each of the men followed. Joe waited till the last one had started up and then leapt for the rope too. Up she went like a cat and landed beside Buffalo on the other side of the wall. He was astounded and gave her a cuff. She dodged away and stood aside, watching. The four men stood in the moonlight, looking up at the tower. They talked in low tones, while the rubber man undid the thin rope from the peg rope and neatly coiled it into loops. The peg rope was left on the wall. And then Joe heard a car going up the lane at the bottom of the castle hill. She heard it stop, and there was no further sound. Joe forgot it for a few minutes, and then she was suddenly on the alert again. Was that voices she heard somewhere? She listened intently. The sound came again on the night air, a low murmur that came nearer. Joe held her breath. Could that horrid man, what was his name, Pottisham, could he have arranged for his friends to fetch Mr. Terry Kane and the children out of the tower that night and take them off to the coast? He would have had plenty of time to get fresh orders and arrange everything before he had gone to the camp and got himself locked up in the caravan. Oh dear, dare she go and warn her uncle Alfredo, where he stood in the moonlight, holding a little conference with the others? She went up to the group of men cautiously. She saw Buffalo take out a dagger knife from his belt and tie it to the end of the thin rope that the rubber man held. She went round the group to her uncle. "Uncle Alfredo," she said beseechingly, "listen, I can hear voices. I think those—" Alfredo pushed her away roughly. "Will you stop this, Joe?" Mr. Slither called her. "See here, Joe, if you want to be useful, hold Beauty for me. He'll be in the way in a minute." He draped the great snake over her shoulders, and Beauty hissed loudly. It began to coil itself round Joe, and she caught hold of its tail. She heard low voices again. This time they came from just the other side of the wall. Those men were going to follow the secret passages and go right up to the tower room. They could be there before Buffalo and the others could carry out their rescue plan. Oh dear, thought Joe, I must do something. But what? Suddenly she made up her mind. She would follow the men through those passages and see if she could warn the others by shouting when she came near enough to the tower room. She ran to the wall. She was up the peg rope and down the other side in a trice. She made her way to where the missing stone left the gap in the old wall. Beauty, the python, was surprised to find himself pulled off and thrown on the ground just before Joe ran for the wall. He wasn't used to that sort of treatment. He glided after her. He too went up the wall and over quite easily, though he did not need to use the peg rope like Joe. He came to the hole in the wall and slipped in after Joe. He caught up with her just as she had reached the end of the small passage through which she had to walk bent double. He pushed against her legs and then twined himself around her. She gave a small scream and then realized what it was. Beauty, you'll get into trouble with Mr. Slither coming after me like that. Go back. Stop twining yourself round me. I've got important things to do. But Beauty was not like Timmy. He obeyed only when he thought he would, and he was not going to obey this time. All right, come with me if you want to, said Joe at last. You'll be company, I suppose. Soon Joe and Beauty had gone down the steep steps that led to the level passage under the courtyard. Along the wider passage they went, Beauty now in front and Joe sometimes tripping over his powerful tail. Up steps again, and into the thick wall of the castle itself. Something shining ahead made Joe suddenly stop. She listened, but heard nothing. She went forward cautiously, and found that in the little secret room there was a small lantern, left there probably by one of the men in front. She went along the passage that led to the spiral stairway. Now she thought she could hear something. She climbed the steep stairs and came to the door that opened onto the little gallery. She opened it slowly. It was pitch dark on the other side, of course, but Joe knew she was about to step out on the gallery. Beauty suddenly slithered up her and coiled himself lovingly round her. She stepped out on the small gallery with Beauty firmly wrapped about her. And then, what a noise she heard! Excited voices! Surely one was Buffalo's. And was that crack a pistol shot? Down below in the courtyard, none of the men had noticed that Joe had disappeared. Buffalo looked up at the high window. He half closed his eyes, getting the distance and the direction fixed in his mind, and then he threw his knife high into the air. It gleamed as it went, taking behind it a long tail of very thin rope. The moonlight showed plainly that the knife was not sharp-pointed. Buffalo had filed off the point, and it was now quite blunt. It fell cleanly in at the window opening, slithered all the way across the stone ledge inside, and clattered to the floor of the tower room. It caused the greatest astonishment there. Mr. Terry Kane, the 4 children, and Timmy were all huddled together for warmth in one corner. They were half asleep when the knife came thudding into the room. Timmy leapt up at once and barked madly. "A knife!" said George in amazement. "A knife, with a string tied on the end." "I think this is something to do with Joe," said Julian. "She hasn't gone to the police. She's got the fair folk to help. This is Buffalo's knife, I'm sure." They were all round him now, examining the knife. "I'm going to the window," he said. "I'll look right out into the courtyard. Hold my legs, Dick." He climbed up on the stone sill and crawled a little forward through the deep-set slit. He came to the outer edge of the window and looked down. "I can see 4 people down in the courtyard," he said. "One is Alfredo, one is Buffalo, and I can't make out the other 2. Ahoy down there!" The 4 men below were standing looking up intently. They saw Julian's head appear outside the window and waved to him. "Pull in the rope!" shouted Buffalo. He had now tied the end of a second peg rope to the thin rope. Julian slid back into the tower room. "This string on the knife runs down the wall," he said. "It's tied to a thicker rope. If we pull it, the other rope will come up and we can climb down it." He pulled on the string, and more of it appeared through the window. Then he felt a heavier weight, and he guessed the thicker rope was coming up. Over the window-sill, in at the window, appeared the first length of the peg rope. "We'll have to fix the end to something really strong, so it will hold our weight," said Terry Kane. He looked about for something to fasten the rope to. In the wall at one side was a great iron ring embedded in the stone. Terry Kane and Julian dragged the thick rope through it until the first peg stopped it. Then they twisted the rope end round upon itself and made great strong knots that could not slip. Julian took hold of the rope and leaned back hard on it, pulling it with all his strength. "It will hold a dozen of us at once," he said. "Shall I go first, sir? I can help everyone else down then, if I'm at the bottom. Dick and you can see to the girls when they climb out." "What about Timmy?" asked George. "We'll wrap him up in the rug, tie him firmly and lower him down on the string," said Dick. "It's very strong, thin rope, really." Julian went to the window and then stopped. Someone was clattering up the stone steps that led to the tower. The door was flung open, and a man stood there, panting. Behind him came 3 others. "Pottisham," said Terry Kane. "So you're back." Timmy began to bark. He showed his teeth and all his hackles rose on his neck. Pottisham backed away. He didn't like the look of Timmy at all. "If you let that dog go, I'll shoot him," he said, and as if by magic a gun appeared in his right hand. George tried her hardest to restrain the furious Timmy. Julian went to help. Between them they forced Timmy back into a corner. "We're taking you, Terry Kane," said Pottisham, "and one of the kids. We can use him for a hostage if too much fuss is made about your disappearance. We'll take this boy." He pointed at Dick. One of the men grabbed Dick, and the other two took hold of Terry Kane. "What about these other kids?" said Terry Kane angrily. "You're surely not going to lock them up in this room and leave them?" "Yes, we are," said Pottisham. "We're leaving a note for the old turnstile woman to tell her they're up here." The three men forced Terry Kane and Dick to the stone stairs, and then everyone shot round in astonishment. A loud voice suddenly came from the window. It was Buffalo. He hadn't been able to understand why nobody came down the peg rope, so he had come up to find out. "Hey there! What's up?" he yelled, and slid into the room. "Who in the world are you?" shouted Pottisham. "How did you get in here?" Buffalo eyed the gun in Pottisham's hand and lazily cracked his whip. "Put that thing away," he said in his drawling voice. As he cracked the whip again, Pottisham pointed the gun at him angrily, and then a most amazing thing happened. The gun disappeared from Pottisham's hand, flew right up into the air, and was neatly caught by Buffalo. The gun had been flicked from Pottisham's hand by the powerful lash end, and had stung his fingers so much he was now howling in pain and bending double to nurse his injured hand. "Let go of them," ordered Buffalo, nodding his head towards Terry Kane and Dick. The three men released them and stood back. "Seems as if we've got to get the police after all," said Buffalo. At that moment the moon went behind a cloud and the tower was plunged into darkness, except for the lantern that Pottisham had set down on the floor when he had first arrived. He saw one slight chance for himself and the others. He suddenly kicked at the lantern, which flew into the air and hit Buffalo, then went out, leaving the entire place in pitch darkness. Buffalo did not dare to fire. He might hit the wrong person. "Set the dog loose," he roared, but it was too late. By the time Timmy had got to the door, it was slammed shut, and the bolt was shot home the other side. There was the sound of hurried steps, slipping and stumbling down the stone stairway in the dark. "They've probably gone down through those passages," said Terry Kane. "They'll be out before we've escaped ourselves, more's the pity. And now we've got to try this rope trick down the tower wall, seeing that the door is locked." "Come on then," said Julian. "Let's go before anything else happens." He went to the window, slid to the outer edge, and took hold of the rope. It was perfectly easy to climb down, though it wasn't very pleasant to look below him into the courtyard. It seemed so very far away. Anne went next, very much afraid, but not showing it. She was very, very glad when she at last stood safely beside Julian. Then came George with a bit of news. "I can't think what's happening to those men," she said. "They still seem to be about, and they're yelling like anything. It sounds as if they're rushing round that gallery that runs along the walls of the tower room below." "If they stay there long enough," said Julian, "we'll have time to go to the hole in the outer wall and wait for them to come out one by one." Timmy came down slowly, swinging a little and bumping into the stone wall now and again. Dick followed. Alfredo and the rubber man and Mr. Slither were now extremely concerned about something. They had missed Joe and the snake. "If Joe's taken Beauty back to camp with her, I'll pull her hair off," muttered the snake man. Terry Kane came down next, and last of all Buffalo. He leapt down beside them, grinning. "There's a tremendous upset up aloft," he said, "yelling and shouting and scampering about. What do you suppose is the matter with those fellows? We'll be able to get them nicely if we go to the hole in the wall. Come on." Something certainly had happened to upset Pottisham and his friends. After the door of the tower room had been slammed and bolted, the men had gone clattering down the stone steps. They had come to the door that led into the gallery, and had opened it and gone out into the gallery itself. But before they could find the spiral staircase a little way along, Pottisham had tripped over something that hissed like an engine letting off steam, and had wound itself round his legs. He yelled and struck out at it. One of the men shone a torch down. What he saw made him yell too and almost drop the torch. "It's a snake! A snake bigger than any I've ever seen!" "Help me, man! Help me!" shouted Pottisham, hitting down at the snake as hard as he could. "It's squeezing my legs together in its coils." The other men ran to help him. As soon as they began to tug, Beauty uncoiled and glided off into the shadows. "Quick! Let's go before it comes back!" panted Pottisham. "Where in the world did it come from?" They took a few steps, but the snake was lying in wait for them. It tripped them all up by gliding in and out of their legs. No matter where they went, that snake seemed to be there, coiling and uncoiling, gliding, writhing, squeezing. It was Jo who had set the python on them, of course. She had stayed up in the gallery while all the disturbance upstairs had been going on, beauty draped round her neck. She had heard men's feet pouring down the stone stairs. She guessed it must be the 4 whose voices she had heard earlier in the evening, the men who had gone through the passages. She pulled the snake off her shoulders. He poured himself down her and flowed onto the ground in one beautiful movement. He glided towards the men who were now coming out of the gallery. After that, the python had the time of his life. The more the men howled, the more excited the big snake became. Jo was huddled in a corner, laughing till the tears ran down her cheeks. She knew the snake was quite harmless unless he gave one of the men too tight a squeeze. At last the men could bear it no more. Somehow they got up into the tower room and left the snake behind. Beauty was tired of the game now, and went to Jo when the girl called to him. The door up into the tower room slammed. Jo slipped up the steps, felt for the door bolt in the darkness, and neatly and quietly pulled it across. Now, unless the men liked to risk going down the peg rope, which she guessed Buffalo had put up against the wall to rescue the others, they were nicely trapped. And if they did go down the rope, they would be sure to find a few people waiting for them at the bottom. "Come on, Beauty, let's go," said Jo, and went down the steps, wishing she had a torch. She remembered the little lantern that had been left in the hidden room, and felt more cheerful. She would be able to take that with her down all those dark passages. They came to the little room, and Jo thankfully picked up the lantern. She went along the secret ways, holding the lantern high, except when she came to the last passage of all, and had to walk bent double. Beauty waited for her when she came to the hole in the wall. He had heard the noises outside. Jo climbed out first, and was immensely surprised to find herself pounced on and held. Then a torch was shone on her, and a shout went up. "It's Jo! Jo, where have you been?" The moon suddenly came out and lighted up the scene. She saw Julian and the rest there coming up eagerly. "You escaped!" she cried. "Did you all get safely down the peg rope?" "There's no time to tell about that now," said Buffalo, watching the hole in the wall. "What about those fellows? Did you hear anything of them, Jo?" "Oh, yes, I followed them. Buffalo, it was so funny," said Jo, and began to laugh. And then who should come gliding out through the hole but Beauty? Mr. Slither saw him at once and gave a yell. "Beauty! So you did take him with you, Jo. Come here, my Beauty." The snake glided to him and wound himself lovingly round him. "Beauty got mixed up with all those men," said Jo, and she went off into peals of laughter again. "They're all right," she said at last, wiping her eyes and trying to stop laughing. "Beauty chased them back to the tower room, and I bolted them in. They're still there, I expect, unless they dare to get down the peg rope, which I bet they won't." Buffalo gave a short laugh. "You did well, Jo," he said. "You and Beauty." He gave a sharp order to Alfredo and the rubber man, who went back over the wall and into the courtyard to watch if the men slid down the peg rope. "I think it would be a good idea to get the police now," said Terry Kane. "That fellow Pottersham is dangerous." "Right," said Buffalo. "We've got another fellow locked up too, in an empty caravan." "But didn't he escape then?" said Jo, surprised. "I thought that man Pottersham, who's up in the tower room now, was the one we locked up." "The one we locked up is still locked up," said Buffalo grimly. "But who is he then?" said Terry Kane, bewildered. "We'll soon find out," said Buffalo. "Come on, let's get going." "Alfredo and the rubber man will keep guard on the peg rope," said Mr. Slither, still fondling Beauty. "There's no need to stay here any longer." So down the hill they went, talking 19 to the dozen. Terry Kane went straight off to the police station. "Let's just find out if you know the fellow we've got locked up in this caravan," said Buffalo, when they got to the camp. "He seems the only unexplained bit so far." He unlocked the caravan and called loudly, "Come on out." The man inside came slowly to the door. There was a shout of amazement from all the children. "Uncle Quentin!" cried Julian, Dick and Anne. "Father!" shouted George. "What are you doing here?" "Julian," said Uncle Quentin, very much on his dignity, "I must ask you to go and get the police at once. I was set on and locked up in this caravan for no reason at all." Buffalo began to look most disturbed. He turned on Jo. "Why didn't you tell us he was George's father?" he demanded. "I didn't know he was," said Jo. "I've never seen him." "Uncle Quentin, I'm sure it's all been a mistake," said Julian, "and anyway, Mr. Terry Kane has gone to the police himself." His uncle stared at him as if he couldn't believe his ears. "Terry Kane? Where is he? Is he found?" "Yes, it's rather a long story," said Julian. "It all began when we saw that face at the window. I told Aunt Fanny all about that, Uncle, and she said she would tell you when you got back from London. Well, it was Mr. Terry Kane at the window." "I thought so," said his uncle. "I told your Aunt Fanny I had a feeling it was. That's why I came as soon as I could. What happened?" Julian told him the whole story, and when he had finished, Uncle Quentin said, "I never heard such a tale in my life, never. Fancy that fellow Pottisham going off with Terry Kane like that." "Somebody's coming up the field," said Joe suddenly. "It's Mr. Terry Kane, and he's got 3 policemen with him." Uncle Quentin leapt to his feet as soon as he saw Terry Kane. He ran to meet him joyfully and pumped his arm up and down. "My dear fellow," he said, "I'm so glad you're safe." "Well, it's thanks to these children," said Terry Kane. "Yes, it's all so extraordinary that I shouldn't believe it if I read it in a book," said Uncle Quentin. "And yet it all happened. My dear fellow, you must be very tired." "I am," said Terry Kane, "but I'm not going to lie down and sleep until those fellows are safely under lock and key. Do you mind if I leave you for a bit and go off to the castle again? I came to ask if one of the children could go with us, because I hear we have to creep through all kinds of passages and galleries and goodness knows what." "But didn't you go that way when Pottisham first took you there and hid you in that room?" asked Dick, surprised. "I must have," said Terry Kane, "but I was blindfolded and half doped with something they had made me drink. I've no idea of the way." "I'll go with you," said Joe. "I've been up and down those passages 4 times now. I know them by heart." She set off with Terry Kane and the 3 policemen, strutting a little and feeling quite a heroine. They all slept very late the next day. However, they did awake at last and got up eagerly, remembering all the exciting moments of the day before. Soon they were all jumping down the steps of the 2 caravans, eager to hear the latest news. "Hello, Father!" shouted George, seeing him not far off. "Hello, Uncle Quentin!" "Hello, Joe!" called the others, and soon they heard the latest bits of information from Joe, who was very proud of being in at the finish. "They didn't put up any fight at all," she said, rather disappointed. "I think Beauty scared all the fight out of them last night. They just gave in without a word." "Now, you children," called Mrs. Alfredo, "I have kept a little breakfast for you. You'd like to come?" They did like to come. Uncle Quentin went to sit down with them. He gazed round, amazed at all the goings-on of camp. Buffalo was doing some remarkable rope-spinning and whip-cracking. The rubber man was wriggling in and out of the wheel-spokes of his caravan without stopping. Mr. Slither was polishing his snakes. "I give you a treat," announced Alfredo to Uncle Quentin. "You would like to see me fire-eat?" Uncle Quentin stared at him as if he thought he had gone raving mad. "He's a fire-eater, Uncle," explained Dick. "Oh," said Uncle Quentin. "No, thank you, my good man. I would rather not see you eat fire. This is really a very extraordinary place and most extraordinary people. Well, I suppose I must be going. I'll catch the bus down to the station." They went to see him off on the bus. It came up well on time and he got in. "Goodbye," he said. "Oh, by the way, what message shall I give your mother, George? She'll expect to hear something from the 5 of you." "Well," shouted everyone as the bus rumbled off, "just tell her the 5 are having a wonderful time. Goodbye, Uncle Quentin. Goodbye."